Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips. Some announcements, things coming up this Wednesday, tomorrow, the 17th, dinner at Wellness Forum. So if you're in Central Ohio, come eat with us and you'll hear my lecture about health, and you'll also be able to ask questions. And if you don't live in Central Ohio, you can remote in via Zoom and watch the lecture and ask questions. And so I can't feed you virtually, but you can at least join our gathering. At 9 o'clock on Wednesday, tomorrow night, is the next Forming Your Tribe workshop, surviving and thriving during coming months, years. Things are difficult out there. And so that might be something that you would find helpful. Thursday, the 18th, for healthcare professionals or people who would like to be reinventing yourself in private practice. Remember, the 22nd and 23rd, we're going to discuss this book, Toxic Legacy, about glyphosate. It's an issue about which there is a lot of confusion. I think I can sort it out for you once and for all. I've spent probably 100 hours on this book. And so anyway, anxious to share it with you. May 25th, there's a non-member tour that's next week at 7, and Q&A, and a sample class for health professionals. And don't forget about our diet and lifestyle intervention course, which starts this summer. 15 modules. It will change your life as even a consumer, let alone as a health professional. The modules are men's health, women's health, children's health, autoimmune diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, mental health, musculoskeletal health, weight loss, etc. It's a great overview. It's not a homework heavy course, and you can audit it. You can even decide to audit it after you enroll. So anyway, if you're interested in any of those things, please send me an email at pampopper@msn.com. All right, so I'm sure that the title of today's lecture caught your attention, but I'll just give you some background. During recent years, patently false statements about vitamin D have been repeated again and again, and now everyone knows that most people are deficient in vitamin D, and that supplementation is helpful for everything. Literally everything. Taking vitamin D is important for preventing COVID, for recovering from COVID, for boosting your immune system, recovering from infectious diseases. There is no disease that cannot be prevented or treated with vitamin D, and the way things are going, soon we'll be told that vitamin D helps children to improve their math skills, and that people who take it have fewer traffic accidents. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but it really has just gone off the rails. The vitamin D hoax, and it is a hoax, is an example of how false ideas about health can gain traction. And once they do, it's almost impossible to dial them back. This is still the case, for example, with omega-3 fatty acids, which are useless and potentially harmful, but still the leading supplement recommended by health professionals. Our members library includes numerous referenced articles and lectures and slide sets about vitamin D, but I'll highlight some new studies that I haven't previously reviewed, starting with a study published in the British Medical Journal in 2022. The study was conducted to determine whether measuring vitamin D levels and treating those who were found to be deficient would lower death rates from respiratory infections, including COVID-19, or would even lower the incidence of such infections. Researchers tested 2,958 people for vitamin D levels, and those with levels under 30, which was 86% of those tested, were given either 800 international units per day or 3,200 international units per day of vitamin D for 6 months. A control group wasn't tested or supplemented, and here are the results. 4.6% of those in the control group had at least one acute respiratory infection during the 6 months of follow-up. 5.7% of those given a low dose of vitamin D had an infection, and 5.0% of the higher dose group developed an infection. These are not statistically significant, but let's go on to the COVID-19 specifically. 2.6% of the control group had COVID-19, 3.6% of the low dose group had COVID-19, and 3.0% of the high dose group had COVID-19 during the trial period. None of these are statistically different from each other, and this is not an outlier trial. With few exceptions, published studies concerning vitamin D either show association, as in people who are sick have low vitamin D levels, and association should never be confused with a cause and effect relationship. They show that vitamin D is useless, like this study, or they show that vitamin D makes a statistically significant difference that is clinically meaningless to the people who would actually be taking the vitamin D supplements. Some background might be helpful in understanding misunderstandings about vitamin D. Sick people, for example, those with tuberculosis or children with rickets, used to be treated with sunlight, and this generally aided in their recovery. Many hospitals had sun decks, and in Europe, people were often dispatched to a sunny locale to recover from tuberculosis. Once vitamin D was discovered in 1931, it didn't take long for the reductionist approach to gain traction. The logic goes like this. Sunlight stimulates the production of vitamin D. Vitamin D supplements are the same as sunlight exposure, which was soon determined to be dangerous to people. Best to slather with sunscreen and avoid the sun and take vitamin D pills. The same logic, by the way, has been applied to food. Oranges contain vitamin C. Vitamin C is good for immune function. Skip the oranges and take the pills. Reductionism in nutrition and health has had disastrous consequences for the health of humans, but it's made supplement companies very, very rich. So back to vitamin D. There are hundreds of published studies concerning vitamin D and COVID. Most show either a negative effect, neutral, or again, statistically significant, but not clinically meaningful outcomes. One outlier that I'll talk about that bears mentioning is a meta-analysis in which taking vitamin D was only beneficial if the analysis was limited to studies conducted during March of 2020. This might make sense, since by March, people living in northern climates like me may have used up their stores of vitamin D from tanning during the last season. When limited to studies conducted during the summer, the benefits were no longer apparent at all. There are several conclusions to be drawn from this and other information I've provided here. One, vitamin D is not a substitute for sunlight. Sun exposure stimulates the production of several types of vitamin D and thousands of photoproducts like nitric oxide, and taking vitamin D3 pills is just not the same. The advice to slather with sunscreen and stay pale as a ghost while taking vitamin D is not scientifically sound and may actually increase the risk of premature death. There are some studies that show that. There may be certain populations and specific times of year when vitamin D might be helpful to some people. And you can see that the financial gain from recommending vitamin D to a smaller population under very specific circumstances would not lead to the financial bonanza that the vitamin D industry and its promoters are enjoying right now. But even with that, there would be a couple of huge caveats. First, according to the US Preventive Services Task Force, it is unknown at this time what constitutes optimal vitamin D levels. The task force also states that it is unknown how much vitamin D you have to take to achieve a particular plasma level. The promoters of vitamin D hoax have influenced labs like Quest to increase reference ranges from what used to be normal at 10.5 to 50 to 100, so everybody is now deficient. Building a strong immune system is much more complicated than making sure vitamin D levels are high enough. Diet, weight status, stress, sleep, social connections, the condition of the microbiome. These are all very important contributors to immune function. To suggest that these can be ignored while popping supplements is reductionism at its worst. There's another major issue concerning vitamin D research that needs to be addressed here, and that is that vitamin D is low when associated with a host of chronic conditions. However, in intervention trials with those conditions and people being given vitamin D shows little to no benefit, which means that low vitamin D levels are likely a result of illness, not the cause. There's a term for this, reverse causation, and there are several studies that have shown this to be the case. When illness is resolved, vitamin D levels increase without supplementation at all. Now, I know that I'm attacking one of medicine's current sacred cows, but it needs to be done. People are being misled about the cause of their health issues and how to solve them, not just by mainstream medical sources, by alternative sources as well. And so my advice to people, it's now May in the Northern Hemisphere, and well, it's May everywhere, but my point is that it's getting to the place where we can get outside and get some sun, and that is the best way to stimulate production of vitamin D. Many, many types of vitamin D and many other photo products that are just as important. So get outside and tan. Don't burn, but tan. And before you go any further with vitamin D supplements, look into this. You know, one of the problems that we have, it's why I teach these research and writing classes and that sort of thing, is that people hear something new and it sounds reasonable, and they say, okay, well, that must be true. Instead of saying, well, that's new, I'm just going to reserve judgment on it until I check it out. And if that step were instituted before you took action, you would take action on far fewer things. So just look into it. Either use our libraries or look into it on your own, and you'll see what I'm talking about. This vitamin D is a huge industry based on a false hypothesis. All right, that's all for today. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.